Burundi's president pushes back parliamentary elections into June amid continued unrest. Broad societal issues cloud police and community relations in a Texas city. And U.S. President Barack Obama breaks a social media world record. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Tonight, Burundi remains a powder keg of unrest as police again clashed with demonstrators who are still angry over President Pierre Nkurunziza's bid for a third term as president. Wednesday's volatile situation ramped after protesters hurled stones at the police, who retaliated by firing tear gas. Wednesday's violent clashes where protesters dug up roads and set up street fires happened as President Nkurunziza said he was pushing back parliamentary and local elections to June the 5th. Nkurunziza said the parliamentary and council vote would be postponed from May the 26th. His decree made no mention of the weeks of unrest in Bujumbura or last week's failed coup. His spokesman told Reuters the decision followed requests from opposition politicians and the international community. However, the most contentious election for president on June 26 remained unchanged. Delaying the vote is unlikely to appease the protesters. Rights groups say at least 20 people have died in 3 weeks of clashes between security forces and protesters who say Nkurunziza's ambition to run for a third term violates the constitution and a peace deal that ended an ethnically fueled civil war in 2005. Laying the same charges against the president, a group of renegade generals tried and failed to overthrow him last week. The government said on Monday it would treat any future demonstrators as accomplices in the failed coup. There are concerns that the longer unrest continues, the more chance that a conflict, which up until now has been largely a struggle for power, reopens old wounds in a region with a history of mass ethnic killing. More than 110,000 people have fled to neighboring Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo and Tanzania, where cholera has been found among the thousands of refugees sleeping outside the shores of Lake Tanganyika, waiting to be evacuated by boat. The failed coup has heightened fears the crisis could split the army, the center pillar of unity after the civil war, which had largely pitted majority Hutus against minority Tutsis. Until recently, President Nkurunziza, a former rebel leader with mixed parentage, had also been seen as a bridge between the main groups in a region that has been an ethnic powder keg for the past half-century. On to Europe now. Italian police have detained 8 people, including 3 minors, on Tuesday on suspicion of being migrant smugglers from Egypt. The entire Egyptian crew on the boat with 221 migrants on board were detained. Police say one of the alleged smugglers detained has a criminal record in Italy. The alleged human traffickers were hired by the boat commander. According to the police, some of the rescued migrants originated from Eritrea, Sudan, Nigeria, Mali, Gambia, Ethiopia, and the Middle East. As the European Union struggles to cope with the surge in illegal immigrants arriving from North Africa, EU ministers have approved an operation that will establish a military force to combat human smugglers across the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, was created less than a decade ago to better focus U.S. military engagement on the African continent. Despite the vast size of Africa, it is America's smallest military command. For more insight into the AFRICOM, we turn to VOA's Carla Babb, who joins us live via Skype from the Pentagon. Now, Carla, to begin with, AFRICOM is headquartered in Germany. Why is that the case?
Well, that has to do with the history of the U.S. military and a little bit to do with the history of the African continent. If you think about it, before AFRICOM was created in 2007, the African continent was covered by Pacific Command in the south, U.S. Central Command, which covers the Middle East now, was covering parts of Northeast Africa, and a big chunk of Africa was covered by European Command. And European Command for the U.S. military is based in Germany. So it just made it easier for the U.S. military to keep the base there in Germany. Now, the second reason is because they were very in tune, the U.S. military was very in tune with the history of the African continent. There's been a massive history of colonialism there, and the U.S. military did not want to imply in any way that they were there for any reason other than to help African nations defend themselves.
Yes.
So that was a very strategic move not to put it in the African continent and to keep a small footprint on the continent.
Which is in Djibouti. What really is the major focus of AFRICOM?
The major focus of AFRICOM is defense building. They had last year hundreds, over 600 different activities with different militaries from African nations, ranging on everything from how to load a C-130 aircraft to how to work under a civilian government authority. As you know, they've also done things with humanitarian exercises to help in disasters. We saw that with the Ebola crisis recently. And then you've seen frequently, the U.S. is also supporting counterterrorism. You've seen that in al-Shabaab attacks in Somalia. You've seen that in northern Africa with al-Qaeda. And the U.S. has also reached out to help against Boko Haram. When the girls were stolen, the U.S. sent in an anti-Boko Haram interdisciplinary team to help with communications and logistics and intelligence sharing there.
And perhaps a little elaboration there. To what extent does the U.S. military really get involved, like in the counterterrorism fight in Africa?
Well, the U.S. military understands that African nations are sovereign nations, and they don't want to get involved unless they're asked. Pat Barnes, who's an AFRICOM spokesperson, said it to me this way. He says, we're not going to go where we're not asked to go. So they can help with Boko Haram in Nigeria as long as they're asked. And I was speaking with some analysts, and they say now that the elections are over, maybe there will be more of a receptive nature to U.S. military support and getting the U.S. military there to help more to fight against Boko Haram. But in Nigeria especially, there's a feeling that they don't want a foreign power to come in and help with something that is a local threat in their eyes. So it's a very, very fine line for the U.S. military to walk, but they just want them to know that they're there for support.
Well, Carla, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent.
Well, Calabab viewer joining us live via Skype from the Pentagon. Now, despite the defeat of Iraqi forces by Islamic State fighters at Ramadi, White House officials say President Barack Obama does not plan to discard his strategy against the militant group in Iraq. VOA White House correspondent Luis Ramirez has more.
With thousands fleeing Ramadi and signs pointing to preparations for a new counterattack, the White House on Tuesday faced more questions on how it plans to move ahead. Even as Iraqi forces continued their retreat, there were no indications of a big change in White House strategy. Before Ramadi's fall, said spokesman Josh Earnest, President Obama's campaign against Islamic State militants has enjoyed periods of progress and successes.
There have been areas of setback, too. That doesn't mean that the strategy needs to be discarded.
With Iraqi forces on the run, there are concerns in Washington the success at Ramadi could embolden Islamic State fighters to head for Baghdad, 130 kilometers east, if they get the opportunity. Security analyst Michael O'Hanlon.
I think if we were to decide that just because ISIL has not made a play for Baghdad recently that it's lost interest, that would be a big mistake on our part. And the proximity of Ramadi to Baghdad makes me worry a little bit more about this question than I might have 48 hours ago.
President Obama has been consulting with members of his national security team, and officials say the plan is to help Iraqis take back Ramadi with precision airstrikes and advice. For now, these images of airlift show the more immediate job of U.S. forces is to help defeated Iraqi soldiers get out of Ramadi. Luis Ramirez, VOA News at the White House.
Now, proposed legislation to end a decades-long ban on exporting most U.S.-produced crude oil is sparking a sharp debate in Washington. One oil company chief says the outdated rules hurt his company and make the U.S. economy vulnerable to foreign oil producers. Burn supporters, however, say ending it would boost consumer energy prices and hurt the environment. VOA's Jim Randall has more.
U.S. drivers waited in long, frustrating lines in 1973 when Arab oil exporters cut supplies to the United States. Worries about access to oil and soaring prices then prompted a new law blocking the export of U.S.-produced crude oil. The ban had little effect when the United States was importing more and more crude to make up for falling U.S. oil production. But new techniques in recent years, called fracking, boosted domestic production and cut U.S. demand for imported oil. That falling demand pushed down global prices and ironically hurt U.S. frackers. Oil producers say lifting the export ban, which they call outdated, would help their companies. Chris Faulkner heads Breitling Oil.
Things have changed. We're not in the idea of fear and scarcity. Exuberance and abundance describes the United States of America today. But this law is continuing to hold us back and drag us back into the 1970s.
But ending the ban would hurt consumers, says Tyson Slocum, who heads the energy program at the Public Citizen Advocacy Group.
The likely result would be higher gasoline prices in the U.S. market.
But the oil industry says exports could cut U.S. gasoline prices.
Because it's putting more supply, other options into the world markets. Gasoline is marketed across the planet, not just the United States. So we could see price reductions in gasoline occur.
The industry's critics say exporting crude would encourage more drilling, which would hurt the environment.
Allowing uninhibited oil exports is going to vastly increase the rate of fracking, and that's going to cause a lot more environmental harm.
However, the oil industry calls environmental concerns exaggerated and contends that properly conducted drilling, including fracking, does not cause undue harm. Jim Randall, VOA News, Washington.
Well, the United States and Cuba resume high-level talks this week on the process of restoring ties. The talks will focus on the steps needed for reopening embassies and fully reestablishing diplomatic relations. VOA State Department correspondent Pam Dawkins has the story.
In a sign of thawing relations between the U.S. and Cuba, boaters arrived in Havana on Saturday after departing from Key West in the first government-sanctioned U.S. to Cuba boat race in more than 50 years. U.S. and Cuban diplomats will seek to further those relations in talks in Washington this week in what will be their first high-level engagement since President Barack Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro's meeting at the Summit of the Americas in April. Both sides are anxious for more progress, says Latin American politics professor William Leo Grand.
Well, I think it's possible that we may get an announcement of a date for opening embassies at the end of the negotiating session that's coming up this week.
The U.S. Congress has until May 29th to weigh in on President Obama's decision to remove Cuba from the state sponsor of terrorism list. Leo Grand says Cuban leader Raul Castro has expressed his readiness to discuss appointing ambassadors as soon as the deadline expires.
He said, as soon as Cuba comes off the terrorism list, we'll be able to exchange ambassadors, implying that the other issues have really been resolved.
One of the big challenges going forward will be maintaining open channels of communications, says former U.S. diplomat Thomas Pickering.
The access is necessary to talk to the Cubans, quite frankly, about the things that we object to. They will have the same access to talk to us. It isn't a one-way street.
He says negotiators will need to craft a diplomatic package that will withstand scrutiny and be accepted by the American people as a strong and reasonable basis for reestablishing ties. Pam Dawkins, VOA News, the State Department.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 in the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, how police are working to build community trust in Texas City. Stay with us.
What's new from VOA?
Do you still have a vinyl record collection? Some audiophiles say they prefer the sound of vinyl over digitized music, and records are making a comeback among younger listeners. Now, a company in Japan is making turntables that can preserve and improve music on vinyl. Laser turntables. No metal stylus touches the record, and the laser sends pure analog audio to your sound system.
Music in vinyl records is more valuable than money.
ELP President Sanju Chiba says that's because analog music is more natural than digitized sound. His company's turntable focuses lasers on the parts of the grooves untouched by a needle. He says the sound is similar to the music of the master tape. The device doesn't come cheap. The base model is $14,000. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's What's New.
Welcome back. Now, this week on Africa 54, we're airing a series of in-depth reports on U.S. police and the difficult challenges they face as they seek to improve community relations. The recent riots in Baltimore over the death of a black man in police custody highlighted the deep-rooted socio-economic problems afflicting many American industrial cities over the past 50 years. And the first of two reports today on policing and community relations. VOA's Jeff Swycott spoke with two residents about their experience of growing up and living in West Baltimore.
Me helping Deirdre.
Linda Keys is raising her three children where she grew up in Baltimore's Druid Heights.
That's me, my husband.
She says drugs, violence, and crime have always been a part of life in West Baltimore.
You really used to see shootouts, like literally, we really would have to be careful because I was caught up in a shootout before. Deirdre, come over this way.
Linda rarely lets her children out of sight when they are outdoors. She hopes one day she can afford to move her family to a safer neighborhood.
I just want to change environments for my children, whereas though they don't have to go outside every day and see people maybe standing on the corner or just see people out there with drinks in their hand.
Her neighborhood, scarred with vacant housing, had a better past. It was once a thriving African-American middle-class community. Bronwyn Maiden is a social worker who grew up in West Baltimore.
That is a community where civil rights leaders were born. They went to school there. It's a neighborhood where many jazz greats, Billie Holiday, lived there, performed there.
News of the assassination of civil rights leader Martin Luther King in April of 1968 led to an eruption of violence in Baltimore and in other American cities. Riots broke out along Baltimore's Pennsylvania Avenue, near where the recent disturbances took place.
After that riot, it became a scar in the city, right down the middle of West Baltimore.
From 1950 to 1995, the city lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs, 30,000 alone from Bethlehem Steel, once the largest steel plant in the country. More than 200,000 people left the city. Maiden says the loss of jobs and people crippled the West Baltimore neighborhood.
You could buy a house if you worked at Beth Steel. Now, however, you have to have a college degree or even higher than a college or graduate degree if you're going to work in some of the top jobs places in Baltimore.
Maiden describes those who took part in the recent violence as children crying out for a better life.
They have been living in these housing projects and these homes with parents, some of whom are substance abusers, some of whom are in prison. And so out of all of that, you see the anger and the frustration, and they're asking us and demanding of us to help come up with some solutions.
Part of the solution, says Linda Keys, is parenting a generation of children with core values.
That's why I say it's not where you live, it's how you live, and I'm teaching my kids to not be like that. Go the other route. We're not going down this road.
Jeff Swycott, VOA News, Baltimore.
Well, tensions between police and residents has led to unrest in some American cities, but in the large, diverse city of Houston, calm has prevailed. Police in some parts of the Texas city are working to build trust with residents. However, as VOA's Greg Flakers reports, the social conditions that can lead to unrest are still present.
This community gathering at a Houston police station takes place every month under the so-called Positive Interaction Program.
We hold our men and women in this uniform accountable. I want to tell you that right now.
Captain Gregory Freeman commands the Houston Police Department's Northeast Division, which has the task of protecting a largely black community.
We can't do this by ourselves, and I needed the public's help on this. And really the only way I can do that, especially in a minority community, is to gain their trust.
Freeman says outreach to community and religious leaders has helped him build that trust.
They don't say things that are hurting me, they're saying things that help me. And I think that that's helped us collectively as a city in light of what we've been seeing happening nationally around the United States with a lot of the unrest.
We have gang members in this area. I would like to have more police presence in my subdivision.
Most here want more police in their neighborhood. Longtime resident Marlon Phillips says officers here listen and respond promptly.
I give the officers in this Northeast Command Station an A+, from the supervisors all the way down.
But Phillips says he's encountered a different attitude from police in other parts of Houston. Bishop James Dixon says that some police officers still interact with minorities in a hostile way.
When law enforcement comes into a community and already has a perception that everyone here is a criminal, everyone here is dangerous, they're responding to it as if they are, on enemy territory.
Dixon says relations between the community and police have improved in Houston, but the underlying causes of unrest still exist.
By now, America and cities in America like Houston should be beyond blatant racial inequality. And that's what the hopelessness and the unrest is stemming from.
He says even in a city as diverse as Houston, the poorest neighborhoods are still made up mostly of minorities. Houston Chief of Police Charles McClellan says social conditions help fuel crime.
It's also about incarceration rates, economics, joblessness, all of those things that disproportionately affect young minority men or men of color.
He says police deal with the consequences of social problems that should be addressed by families, communities, lawmakers, and government leaders. Greg Flakus, VOA News, Houston.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Yes, it's Barack. Really? We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
In Burundi, President Pierre Nkurunziza signs a decree delaying parliamentary and local elections until June 5th, following protests and a coup attempt. We stay in Burundi, where police fired tear gas and bullets in the air as protesters continued to demand that President Pierre Nkurunziza end his bid for a third term next month. In Ghana, the 47th Ordinary Session of the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, elects President Macky Sall of Senegal as its next chairman. In Ethiopia, poverty and unemployment are key concerns for Ethiopians ahead of elections on May 24th.
That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. U.S. President Barack Obama sent his first tweet from his very own account on Twitter on Monday, quickly amassing 1 million followers in 5 hours, breaking a world record previously held by actor Robert Downey Jr. Hello, Twitter. It's Barack. Really? 6 years in, they're finally giving me my own account, Obama tweeted from his verified @Porter's account. Mr. Obama and his advisors pioneered the use of social media like Twitter and Facebook in the 2008 presidential campaign and have embraced their use in the White House as well. Now, next up, roller skating transforms the Kenyan slum. This was one of Karagocho's most notorious streets. Drug peddling, mugging, and prostitution was the order of the day. But this is slowly changing with the Hope Raisers skating project. Organizers say they have trained more than 1,000 slum children to skate to give them an alternative to crime while reclaiming dangerous streets at the same time. Now, the Hope Raisers funding comes from private donors and a small contribution of 500 Kenya shillings a year from the children's parents. And in other skating news, Russian President Vladimir Putin was the star of an exhibition ice hockey match in Sochi, scoring 8 goals. Putin's team won 18-6 in a match to celebrate 70 years since victory in World War II. Most of the 62-year-old's goals followed assists from NHL stars. During his 15 years as Russia's leader, Putin has frequently displayed his athletic skills, most notably in judo and swimming. He took up ice hockey only in recent years to promote the sport, and that is what is trending today. Now, would you consider your country happy? Well, the 2015 World Happiness Report revealed its ranking of 158 countries using a set of variables, including economic and social well-being. Some of this year's results may surprise you.
Like some hit singles, happiness transcends boundaries. But the reasons vary from country to country. The 2015 World Happiness Report, published by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, uses experts in economics, psychology, health, and public policy to determine measurements of well-being across nations. In this year's report, Switzerland took the top honor, replacing Denmark, which finished third. Northern Europe continued to fare best overall, whereas the United States placed 15th, ahead of Brazil, but behind neighbor Mexico. According to Claire Bolger, editor and coordinator of the report, high income is a common variable at the top, but does not automatically translate to happiness.
Some basic level of income does matter. You need to be able to meet your basic needs, you need to be able to feed yourself, but after a certain threshold, income does not really matter for happiness.
Top-ranked countries also typically see low levels of corruption and strong social support. That is, having people you can count on in times of need. According to Bolger, social support is what largely differentiates Iceland, ranked second, and Greece, 102nd, in response to the financial crises that affected both. By comparison, the world's lowest-ranked countries, including much of sub-Saharan Africa, are often associated with extreme poverty, but not exclusively.
You now see Syria has dropped to the very bottom of the list. The Central African Republic is at the bottom. Afghanistan. So it's really countries that have had very, very, very poor countries and high levels of conflict and violence.
According to the report, other key variables that determine happiness include healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, and generosity. Ramon Taylor, VOA News, New York.
Let's try to be happy, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music. Ali.
On
VOA.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent.